a bit of a deeper understanding, and I'm certainly not an expert in bioregions or the ecology, but it's just something that Dee and I, when we've been developing our asset mapping atlas, and we had a bit of a conversation about that a couple of weeks ago, and thinking about what does mapping our ecology or bioregion look like from an asset mapping point of view. What are the things that we can be mapping, and how do we map them? So that's a little bit around what the conversation we're hoping to have today. We've got some ideas, and we've started playing around a little bit, but getting the collective wisdom of this group as well to see what else could this look like, what else could it be, and that honouring that the world is made up of more than just people, communities, organisations, systems. We want to look at what does that look like when we think about the earth as a whole. So people, land, air, sea, everything. So what I was, when I was preparing for this, I thought that it would be great, and I'll go over sort of a little bit about what I've learned from bioregionalism. And I was like many of you when I started studying sustainable development a few years ago. I'd never heard of a bioregion. I didn't know what it was. So, and the more I learned about it, the more it interested me. And then Dee and I started having these conversations around, what can ABCD offer in a more holistic way of a mapping tool. So, as we know, with asset mapping, those 3 key steps that we've talked about in quite a few sessions now, it's about exploring, identifying, discovering the assets that exist in our communities, actually connecting them together. So it's not just about creating a list of what exists, it's about how do we actually connect them together and create opportunities for those assets to be productive and powerful together. So, and quite often we know that when we're mapping assets, that natural environment isn't necessarily included as an active asset. It's quite often just a very passive asset that we map and go, oh yeah, we've got a park here or a river here or things like that. I think bioregional or ecological mapping give us a little bit more of an insight in how we can create harmony across our environments. So just this little graphic that I've got here is actually the Bioregionalism Wheel. So it starts as thinking, very locally on some topics, and then sort of looking at what does that look like as we build out from the centre. So from our very local place-based to a little bit broader in our region, and then and then sort of going out to the global. So I won't go through each of the wheel areas in detail, but just pick out a couple. So if we're looking at something like our local economies, so very locally that could look like a local community currency. Then when we look at our bioregion, it's about focusing on a stable economy, and then thinking about relocalizing everywhere. So that reverse of globalization, which I think is really quite topical at the moment with COVID, and realizing that where we, some of those industries that we've shipped offshore and things like that, the impact that has on us when there's something like a pandemic and we actually go, oh, we don't actually create face masks anymore in this country, or whatever it might be. So, thinking about how do we map those sorts of things, food production, so that, the moving from where somebody else grows our food and we just go to the supermarket. You know, it breaks my heart when I hear of kids that think that milk comes from a carton. They don't actually understand how food's produced, that milk actually comes from a cow, or that vegetables are actually grown in a garden, not just on the shelves of the supermarket. So it's about, you know, locally that could look like, as it says there, growing food, not lawns. From a community perspective, what is our local food security? And then looking at, you know, organic solutions in a global food market or global food supplies, so that we're getting the best, most nutritious food. And there's a lot of work happening with farming practices, which are regenerative farming. So it's about how do we improve the environment in which we farm. So, and as you can see, there are others there as well, which you can certainly dig into. But I sort of looked at this wheel and thought, what does this mean? What could this look like from a mapping tool perspective? So, and that's part of why we're here. So what is bioregionalism? As it says there, it's actually that the organisation of human society within the ecological capacity of a natural region. So in Australia and most other countries, you've got your map, you know, and it's divided into your cities and states and things like that. But there are also bioregional overlays that you can look at, which actually maps which shows the bioregions that have been set out. And interestingly, not many of those bioregions look like a whether it's a state electorate or a federal electorate or even a local electorate. You know, so when we think about governance, we're not governing within a bioregion. Most areas govern across various bioregions. Whereas this is really about thinking about what's the ecological capacity of a natural region. So from a bioregional perspective, what it actually seeks to do is ensure, as it says there, that political boundaries match ecological boundaries. It's highlighting the unique ecology of a bioregion, encouraging consumption of local foods, the use of local materials, the cultivation of native plants, and to encourage sustainability across a region, so that we're actually not, you know, we're not trying to grow things in a part of the world where they're not meant to grow, you know, or we're not continually sowing in the same paddock or field, so that we actually lose any soil nutrients and we end up with soil degradation, which is not then conducive to good food production. The implications of bioregionalism, and as I won't read through the small points, but it's about that knowing the land, learning the law. So, you know, First Nations people lived on land in harmony for thousands of years. So what is it? Learning, understanding what the history is, and understanding that human and natural interactions in those areas. It's also developing the potential of a region, rather, and this is almost for me thinking about the what's strong in our place and what we can do better using a bioregional concept. And then that liberating self. So it's that, you know, individual potential about removing constraints on personal freedoms, and that impersonal market forces that we've created. And I don't, for any Australians that are here, I don't know if you watched Q&A last night on the ABC, where we actually saw what a neoliberal rationalist response to a pandemic could look like, where the economic expert was talking about basically just letting people die because that's less costly to the economy than shutdowns, which was interesting and thought-provoking and had me yelling at the TV a few times. So, thinking about that really brief introduction to bioregionalism and the ecological concept of mapping, what could that look like from a community development perspective? And this is the question that I'd love us to dig into together to see, you know, what could it look like? Is it around mapping those, you know, regenerative farming practices in our community and what they could offer the broader community? Is it around understanding what our bioregional areas are and what does that mean? What does that mean to the way that we produce food, the way that we use the land, the way that we interact with the environment? And these are just some questions that I've been asking myself, and also thinking about having culture at the centre. So within each of those parts of the bioregional wheel is when we think about, you know, the culture of an area, the history, the sense of knowing the region, you know. You talk to farmers, you talk to First Nations people, and they'll tell you what the lands used to be or what used to happen, or, you know, they'll give you the stories, and it's about capturing that and how do we learn from that, and how can culture influence governance and population and economies and things like that. So yeah, really interested in your thoughts, your feedback. What are you hearing when we're talking about this, and when we look at that bioregional wheel? What does that raise for you? What possibilities do you see from, we took this and adapted it to a really from a community development perspective? What could that mean? So that's basically the presentation today, because really what I want to get into is that having a bit of a conversation around what it could look like if we think of some of the tools that we use to map other assets in our community. How can we really amplify the voice of the ecological concept of mapping? And if we go back to the asset mapping atlas, thinking about, you know, how do all of these levels of mapping or spheres of mapping within the atlas, how do they all interconnect with each other? So just before we start our conversation, just my encouragement, oops, sorry, I just lost that slide. I'm just trying to move things around, is to actually think about exploring our bioregions and understanding what they are and what do they look like in relation to the way that we map our communities, and thinking about encouraging us all to think about an ecological point of view of community. What does that look like? And then what are some of the small actions for big impact across our communities? You know, taking a more holistic approach of what a community is. So I hope that, in a nutshell, helps you understand a little bit more about what a bioregion is, and, you know, happy for us to actually have that conversation now and open it up, because I'm really keen to hear what you guys heard in that, you know, 10-minute overview of bioregionalism. I'm going to stop sharing and let's have a conversation.